Thank you for coming today. That's what we're going to do. We're celebrating and praising God for His faithfulness over all our days and over all your days. Our theme today is that God holds it together. And that's why we can celebrate no matter what the day is like, because we have something to praise God for. Just a couple announcements. We do not have children's church for elementary kids, but we do have the garden for preschool kids and nursery for those who are even younger there. And we appreciate those who are stepping in to help us on this day and sacrificing their time not to be able to be here in this service. But we're going to recognize them actually in a little bit. Would you stand with us today? Thank you for coming to this celebration. God is faithful. Every Sunday we say is a celebration. You know, that's why we meet on Sunday, because we celebrate the resurrected Lord. And we always have something to be thankful for. As we sing this next song, let's continue our praise, but let's ask God and thank Him for His presence. Father, thank you for joining us, because without you, none of us would be here. You hold us together. And so we have a lot to be thankful for. During the valleys, like this song spoke about, you are there. And on the mountaintops, of course, we can see. But it is the faith that you have given us that holds us in between. And help us, Lord, to celebrate all the ups and downs that you have brought us through together. You hold us together, and we have much to be thankful for. We continue to praise your name today. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Remain standing. Right, so I thought it would be best, because if she talks and I talk, you may just like, that's a lot of talking. We have 20 years of stuff to say. And you know from experience that I can say a lot every Sunday. So I'm just hoping that the smell of the chicken doesn't come up this way anytime soon, or I may be leaving, people may be leaving before I'm finished. So I thought I better put the best first. So Angela's going to come and share some of her thoughts over our last 20 years, or our first 20 years here. All right?
Okay, I've got a tissue. I'm going to need it. So these are my thoughts that have been rolling around in my head these past couple weeks. That really successful ministry is like a successful marriage. It takes two parties that are loving, encouraging, supporting, forgiving of each other. So I want to thank all of you for the part that you played in these past 20 years of our ministry here. For me, that support has looked differently in different aspects of my life. For me, it was friendships. That is one of the most difficult things about ministry, is moving to a new location, not knowing anyone, and making those new friendships. One of the first memories that comes to my mind is getting a call and having Cheryl Chrisman, Marge Hershey, and Sherry Hilliard show up at my door and want to take me up to Bern to the Gathering House for cappuccino, muffins, and visiting the little shop that was there, which I still have a few items, I think, that I purchased there. And just that initial welcome from those ladies meant such a great deal to me. Also, very close to our arrival here, some other ladies reached out to me. And through shared loss, we developed friendships that have remained to this day. Through different ministries that I've been involved in over the years, Kids Club, Kids Hope, Ladies Ministry, Bible School, there were ladies who stood beside me, worked with me to carry that load. Alice Bollinger, Betty Stone, Janet Pfeiffer, Cheryl Chrisman were all integral parts of those ministries, and most recently, Kathy Pinkerton. If you ever need anything done, ask Kathy. She'll have it done a week before you've even thought of it. Let's just put that way. Christina Daniels as well, who took over for Alice when she could no longer be the treasurer. Probably for me, most importantly, was the support that you all gave my children. who were blessed to all be here today. From Lauren, who didn't even exist when we moved here. After about 4 months of living here, found out I was pregnant with her. And you all were very gracious to give us a shower to anticipate her arrival. We kind of thought we were done with 3, so had really no baby stuff left to share with this new one. From all of you who babysat for them over the years, I kind of started making a mental list, and I was going to write them down, and the more I thought, the longer the list got. So I'm sure I would leave somebody out. For the many of you who babysat so Paul and I could have a date night, we tried to keep that a priority, but also doctor's appointments during my pregnancy with Lauren, doctor's appointments that the kids had, whatever it might be. There were so many of you who were ready and willing to either come to the house and hang out with them. Danny Yoder got a good memory of dropping one of our kids in the kiddie pool. Anyway, that was greatly appreciated. There was also an eventful day when Jacqueline totaled her car on her way back from Dunkirk. Paul was out of town. Seems like he's out of town quite a bit when things would go wrong. But Steve and Jane Evans arrived to the scene even before I could get there. And Jane rode in the ambulance with Jacqueline, and I can't tell you the assurance that gave me that somebody that loved her and cared about her was with her during that time. We've been a pretty transparent family, I feel like. I think you knew that Ryan had a lot of difficulty growing up, going to school, stress, anxiety. And there was an individual in this congregation that's no longer with us, but Cheryl Chrisman took it upon herself, with my permission, to kind of adopt Ryan as what she called her secret friend. And not very many people know this, but little gifts would show up at our house with his name on it, things that he liked, things that he enjoyed. And I'm fully convinced that every gift that came was accompanied by prayer. And I'm convinced that that was an integral part of what helped him get through those difficult years and the love and support that Cheryl showed him and showed to the rest of our family. Most recently, we're very thankful for the support that you showed Evan in his most recent health crisis, of one of many, his emergency appendectomy that caused him to have to be off work for several weeks, and the more than generous offering that you gave to help him meet his financial needs during those weeks. And for all of you who have prayed for my children, who have sent them notes of encouragement and of love, I'm deeply grateful. And really for support that was shown to our whole family through people like Sandy Lawrence, who you probably weren't aware. I don't know how she did it, but she had a gift of couponing and saving and accumulating points on things, and she would just randomly hand us $100 gift cards for gas that she had accumulated somehow, coupons. I can't even count the number of ways that she blessed us over the years. Glendale and Mabel Shoemaker, who sat right up here about where my kids are, loved us, supported us, encouraged us, had us in their home. And I think from a pastoral perspective, the building campaign, when you have the cornerstone, one of the cornerstone pillars of your church in support of undertaking that kind of project, can't be underestimated. It was a wonderful blessing, and we miss them deeply. You have also invited us into your grief. One of the very first interactions I remember shortly after we moved here was with Sue Murphy. Her husband, Tom, was ill with cancer. We visited them at their house, and it wasn't shortly long after that that he passed away. And that may have been one of the first funerals that Paul did in his ministry here. And that bonded us with Sue as she allowed us into that grief in her life. visited her many times in her home, and since then, since she has moved out. The community's loss of Andrew Whitaker, Andrew Betts, most recently, Augustine's diagnosis. These families all gave us the privilege of allowing us to come alongside them in their grief and to minister with them, but also to grieve with them. That means a lot to a pastoral couple. And also for those of you that supported me in the loss of my mother, who made that 2.5-hour trip for the funeral that meant more than I can explain to you. It's also been encouraging for the way that you've supported my husband. We don't compare notes. I'm not exactly sure what all he's going to share today, but the board members over the years, Dwayne, it's good to see you here, and for all the times that you gave support, encouragement, advice, correction, all the things that we needed as young pastors in this new ministry. Danny Kelly, he's probably back in the sound booth, not just served as a board member, but served as a friend and as a mechanic to many of our vehicles over the years. Steve Chrisman, Richard Pfeiffer, Ken Hilliard, Rex and Kathy Pinkerton, John Hilty. Again, I hate to mention names because I know I'll forget someone, but all of those men and all those couples that assisted with board issues and trustee issues and just made it easier for Paul to lead the church. For those that have chosen to trust him not just as their pastor, but as their friend, Josh Walker, Randy, who chooses to try to keep up with his biking adventures, whether it's across Indiana or across Michigan or just around the county. It means a lot to me that those men have given themselves in friendship to Paul. And for the men that have worked alongside Paul in ministry, Ben Capshaw and his wife Amanda, and that sweet friendship that we developed with them early on, and to see her now growing and blossoming in the ministry that God has put on her heart. Bob Schroeder, Joe Schmidt, Patrick, and I mentioned this morning in Sunday school, when you work with Paul, you never quite know what that might involve. Could be any number of things. Could be ministry, could be getting Christmas decorations out of the attic, could be rescuing one of our kids whose car just broke down on the side of the road. Carl Walker, thank you very much. And you may want to ask Amanda about the phone call they got one morning at 7:30 because there was free salt on the side of the road. And if anyone knows Paul, you know he can't pass up something free. So you never know what you're going to be asked to do. But as a pastor's wife, I deeply appreciate those of you that have chosen to do that. Early in our ministry, as a couple, I think Jacqueline was just a baby, my grandmother, who was a pastor's wife, gave me some advice. She said, I believe long-term ministry is always best. She said, it's best for the church, it's best for the community, and it's best for you as a family. And I can attest today that she was absolutely right. And I thank you for the part that you all played in allowing that to happen for us here at Bryant Wesleyan.
I heard a radio personality one time always respond this way, and they would say, how are you doing? And he would say, better than I deserve. And so that's how I feel today. Well, my wife and I talked a little bit about how to approach this idea of thanking people, and the disclaimer is out there. I wish it were in small print and big print. There is no way we're going to mention everybody's names, nor are we going to try. So I said, how are we going to tell you not to have your feelings hurt? I'm telling you my secret. If I don't mention you, you're probably one of my favorite people. Well, you put that on a note in your back pocket so when you do laundry tomorrow, it'll come out and you're like, ah, yeah. He didn't say anything about me, but I'm one of his favorite people. Okay, that's the best I can do, to say thank you to everyone who is here today. As we've said before, as we've come to this day, this is not about us. It's about us. It's not about she and I. It's about all of us. And as I said at the beginning of the service, I think that my theme today, if you would capture it, if you would leave with anything, is that God holds it all together. And we're going to try to keep our words as short as possible. But I told the ladies we're going to eat on Monday. Okay? So, it's good food. It'll last that long. So we celebrate this partnership, whether as my wife did so well in stating, partnership of friendship, partnership with board members, partnership with ministry help, all sorts of partnerships. Some of you here today, thank you so much. You were partners with us in the past. Some people are here today that have really not attended this church. You're partners with us in the ministry elsewhere. Some of you are part of the community ministries that we have had a part of. We are all in this together. And if there's anything the Lord has blessed me with, is this understanding that God is bigger than me. He's bigger than this congregation. And so wherever we go, we are with great people, because we know that God chooses other churches, He chooses other places, and God is calling people from all tribes, nations, and languages. And I get to celebrate with that one time. And as much as I'm looking forward to seeing all of you in heaven, I'm glad it's not just going to be us. And so a long time ago, God said, whatever happens, it's okay, because we're just part of something bigger. I first want to thank my family, because I'm telling you that there's probably many conversations where they said, but man, he is always busy. And yes, I'm always busy. But I'm here to justify my behavior. I want you guys to remember, we did do T-ball, we did do soccer, we did do vacations, we did do weekend camping, we did camp in the backyard, we did jump off the roof onto the trampoline, we did a lot of stuff. I don't know if our insurance here covered that, but sorry, we did that. That's in the past. And I know they are the most important people in my life. But I'm sure there were times when they wondered if they were the most important, because they would say, man, who's the most important, the church or them? It's them. But here we are. They're all back with us. Don't they look awesome? My goodness. Would you do us a quick favor? If you were part of this church, not a week later or a month later or a year later, but if you were attending this church regularly when we arrived, would you stand rather quickly? If you called this your church when we arrived, would you stand? Amazing. Thank you very much. That means a lot to us, but it also shows that things change. And we appreciate everybody that's been part of those changes over 2 decades. It's hard to believe. My wife focused on a lot of great people who are no longer with us, but I think the Bible says they are with us. There's a great cloud of witnesses, and they are celebrating with us today. Also, we just want to take just a moment to thank a few people. I'm not going to mention a lot of names because I think I would be hard-pressed to do that. But since we're kind of celebrating longevity here, I want to mention just a handful of people. I have a certificate and a note for them. I'm not going to make them come up. But Laurel Walter stepped into our garden program, which is preschool, about a couple years after we arrived. So I asked her if she remembers the first day. She does. It's been 18 years that Laurel has been back in the garden and almost never missed. And she also never gets to come in here. And so if you know who Laurel is, when you see her later, would you thank her for 18 years of guiding every kid that has come through our church at one time or another? Laurel has touched them in a significant way. So I give her applause today, too. Marge Hershey has given almost 20 years. I know she's done other things before this, but almost 20 years to our Kids Club director. And recently she's had to step down, but for around 20 years, we know that she's helped us with Kids Club. And the biggest thing that Marge does is love kids. I like kids. She loves kids. And I'm glad I'm not the director, or we wouldn't have nearly as many kids here today. But Marge, thank you so much. Would you give Marge a hand for... I don't know if anybody's going to break this record. Now, there may be some who did this in the past, but they're no longer with us. But in just a few weeks, Ken Brunswick is going to step down from teaching Sunday school class, the same class, for 30 years. 30 years. Ken, right there. He started out calling it the Old Testament class, and you've just now moved to New Testament. 30 years teaching the Old Testament in a way that no one else could, and we appreciate that so much. And for 20 years, as has already been said, my wife has been in almost every position that you could possibly be in. She has done the opening and the Bible teaching of Kids Club. She's been Sunday school teacher in various classes, Kids Hope director, mentor program that we used to do at Bloomfield School, women's ministry director, now the Truth Builders, not to mention the personal support that she's kept the home going while I've tried to keep the church going. There's so much more to be said. But besides the personal things that I'll tell her later, if you want to look up Proverbs 31, verses 10 and 12, I'll let you do that. So I want to tell a few stories today. I want to let you in a little bit. Some of you know some of these things that have happened. Some of you were aware of them happening. But I really want to let you in a little bit behind the scenes and a little bit into the scary places of my mind. And so hopefully that won't be a reason for resignation today. Hopefully that'll just be some continuation. But I want to start from the beginning. Dwayne Michael was the chair of the board and was for several years. And I remember Dwayne calling us. I remember Sherry being there. I remember them putting us up at the hotel. And I remember the first candidate sermon, I think that's what you call it, that we did. It was the day after my one of my rides across the state. And was that the 1 year I wrecked and was kind of beat up a little bit? And I'm sure my mind wasn't in a good place. But you said, I guess that's all we can get. We'll take him. And so, but somehow we made it through that sermon. And so we showed up 2 months later because it really wasn't our intent to leave Evansville, but the Lord worked it out. And we came here on Labor Day 2003. So we always know our anniversary because it's Labor Day. Doesn't matter. Well, on that year in 2003, it obviously was on a Monday. It was September 1st. So technically, we are into our 21st year already. Can you believe it? Whew! All right. If you really, really want to know, that's only 7,314 days today. 7,314 days, but who's counting? I remember we were warmly welcomed. And this has proven true almost every year. The early part of September here in Bryant is hot, almost always. And we just came from that, if you remember right. And I believe it was warm that day. And so we pulled up, and we had a 26-foot U-Haul. I think that's as big as you could get. Right now, we'd have to have 3 to leave. And that's one of the reasons it's like we don't really want to leave because we don't want to go through that. So we had a 26-foot trailer. The people just came and helped unload, and some of you were there. And we remember some of the people, and some of the people we don't, because at the time we didn't know you, right? So we didn't even know your names hardly. But you guys unloaded us, and we had them marked pretty clearly because Dwayne helped us know that the one room was going to be blue, and you painted it. I don't know if you guys know this. They asked us, what color do we want? And you painted it. And so we put them in this room and that room. Well, then when we got them all in, they said, well, we can just help you set up beds, and we can help you set up stuff. And so the lady said, well, we can actually help you put food in the cabinets because that'll be easier later. Well, we forgot that we like bourbon chicken. And so we had a bottle of bourbon. And we think in our minds it was Amanda Graver and maybe Amanda Hilty pulled that out, and my wife's going, what kind of alcoholics did we just have come to Bryant? And so they were like, no, we're alcoholics too, it's okay. They didn't say that. They didn't say that. They didn't say that. They said, no, we know exactly what you're talking about. And we're like, good, we're in the right place. So I haven't seen that bottle since, so who knows who got it. Then the next Sunday was September 7th, and so I'm sure I preached, and then the next weekend was Bryant Days. Hello. You just immersed yourself in a new place. Bryant Days. Now, if you don't know Bryant Days, in the past, it was a big thing, but by the time we got here, they still had cow patty bingo. I had never had I didn't know what cow patty bingo was. And country singing, karaoke stuff. And so one of the things that we do at Bryant Days is we had our rummage sale. And I think the first year we were here, it was in our garage. The rummage sale was in the garage of the parsonage. A couple tables set up, and I'm like, well, we got to figure out something to do because we have stuff in our garage. We don't want to sell it. So I think Betty Stone, we came up with an idea. We were going to have a tent out back. Remember that? And for several years, like about 5 more years, Betty helped us get a tent, and we did the rummage sale out of there until we built the building. Then I remember that first Bryant Days. Now, since then, when we had Bryant Days, like I was the preacher and I organized it and we put everybody together. But that first Bryant Days, I was just the new person. And I remember standing in the middle of Main Street, and it was cooking, hot cooking. That's what I meant. And there was no tent, there was no nothing. And all the people were squeezed over on the yard of Sue Murphy's house in the shade. And I'm like, if they get shade, I'm getting shade next year. So we got a tent from that point on. We had a tent at Bryant Days. And then we moved into the community center So that was the next week. This is not going to be 20 years of week after week. I'm just warning you, okay? So then I just want to, I want to leave my notes here for real quick. So then, another thing real quick at Bryant Days is Ryan turned 1 that weekend. He turned 21 yesterday. And so at Bryant Days, they also had cutest baby contest. And he won it. Woo! Yeah. And so Betty, working with the radio, had all these things at Bryant Days, who won this and who won that. And they announced Ryan VanCise won the baby contest. And then probably Rob Weaver or maybe Jeff goes, I don't recognize that name. So now, that can't be right. That can't be right. I don't recognize that name. So hopefully now after 20 years, when the things were announced this weekend, they recognized the name just a little bit more. So then it wasn't long, then we called Ben from Indiana Wesleyan. He was still a student and came over to help our youth. And then it wasn't long till Amanda joined him. And I wish I had all the time to tell all the wonderful things that Ben and Amanda did together. We've already heard about the salt. I would tell you that doesn't sound right, but that's exactly the way it happened. I took the kids to school at Bloomfield. It was a nasty January day, I think. I'm pulling out of the driveway, and the highway truck must have come down the highway and paused, forgot to turn a chute off. There was a stack of blue gold standing there. And I called Ben, and I think he was still in bed, rightfully so, because it was misty and nasty. And I said, get as many buckets and boxes and meet me at the church in 15 minutes. And I'm sure he's like, oh. I think it's a gift that kept on giving. So I think we saved the church about $300 for the next 3 years because we don't have to buy salt anymore. But all the youth that were under their care had an excellent time and lots of memories. And Survivor, camp, and all that, just great. I wish I could have time to tell you more. And then about the time, just before they decided they should move on, Bob and Sue came to us, and the Lord worked that out. And I can't say enough about the things that Bob and I did for almost 10 years. But it wasn't just ministry. We did the phone system here in the church. Any conceivable project, we did it together, helping people, youth retreats, endless hours working on almost anything. And Bob, again, loved the kids, and the kids loved him and wished they could be with us today. Then Bob decided, well, I'm too old for youth. I need to do something else. And then I get this weird call. I don't even know who it was from. Someone said, there's this guy at Portland McDonald's who says he's called to the ministry and he attends a Wesleyan church. You know how odd that sounded? Because there is no other Wesleyan church in this area. I know almost every kid in the area that would have been called to ministry, and I didn't know this person. And so I followed up, and it was Patrick. And the Lord had just called Patrick into the ministry, and so we said, well, we have ministry here. So we called him, and here he is. And now how long has it been? 7 years. 7 years. And I could say more about Patrick, but all I know is when he leaves here, he's going to have on his resume stuff he never thought he was going to get here. The IT guy, the new phone guy, the youth pastor guy, the spaghetti cook guy, the maintenance guy. I mean, it's just going to be, he can go anywhere from here. We prepare him right. I told Joe when he came in, I said, I'm not going to say much about Joe, but I could. We're so glad that Joe's been with us. We've watched him grow, go to Honduras, get his ministry license, ordination, and now helping us with Casa Esperanza in Portland. Pray for Joe. It's not going to be easy, but God is faithful. And so we're thankful that Joe's with us. Then we got to building the fellowship hall in 2007. I wish I could tell you all about that because it was just a milestone in the life of the church. It doubled the size of our footprint. And in the newspaper when we talked about it, I think some guy interviewed me and said, the whole town could sit in here. And I'm like, yeah, that's why we built it. You know, the whole town can come to Bryant Wesleyan Church. And that's what we wanted. But we decided early on that when we read this book with the board, there was a phrase in the book that said, let's do something so big that if God isn't in it, we fail. That was the phrase. We put it up on the wall, and you know what? It was on the wall of our boardroom until just recently. It's been there for over 15 years. Let's do something so big that if God isn't in it, we fail. Let me just tell you a couple stories about that project. We thought when we first started out that it was going to be roughly like $350,000. We had about $50,000 on hand, so we thought we were going to raise about $300,000. Well, I knew from experience it's really hard to get that much money generated quickly and faithfully without assistance. And so I had been a part of a ministry, and I knew a guy personally, and Bob says hi to everybody. Bob Hallett was our consultant. And I figured that if we could bring Bob in and with his experience, that would help us. But the thing is, those outside consultants, they're not cheap, and they're not free. And it was a lot of money. I'm going to tell you now, and some of you were here when that happened, it was about $24,000. And I'm frugal. I pick up salt on the side of the road. Okay? So I'm right with the board on this. I'm like, how are we going to spend $24,000 when we only have $50,000 and we're trying to raise $300,000? That would be the first $24,000 toward the $300,000. We're with me, right? You understand? But we actually talked about it. We, considered it, and finally we were like, okay, we will do this. That's a big step of faith to spend half the money you have. 2 weeks later, we get a check for that exact amount of money. It's not from you. It's not from your ancestors. It's almost from no one knew. I don't even hardly remember the story, except for if I remember right, somebody, I'm talking about like 80, 90 years ago, attended. And their child finally died. No, I'm talking about this was an old person who passed away, and it was their parents who attended. No one even know who they are. And we get this anonymous gift, $24,000 that paid for the step of faith that we took. And so then we went out and we started building, and our $300,000 need turned to $400,000 need. We had to go back to the bank and borrow another $100,000. But God was faithful, and this time you did step up, and people gave and gave and gave. And in just a short amount of time, we paid off $550,000. Thank you for that. $550,000. Never while we were raising money did we say we need $500,000. Sounds like a lot. But when it was over, we could celebrate that God helped us raise over $500,000. He is faithful. You are faithful. And we said we're going to build it for the community, and we've used it for scouts and blood draw, Red Cross blood drive, weddings, all sorts of things. One of the things that I thought I would tell you about real quick is that I have a gift of finding salt on the side of the road. I have a gift of finding couches and freezers, and sometimes Vicki just calls me up and says, hey, can you find me this? And I'm like, I don't know. And then like 2 days later it is. I don't know. I have this gift. The Lord knows I don't have money, so I need free stuff. And so I want to just tell you that there was one time I sat down and calculated, and I wish I had the list, and I know you're going to think I'm exaggerating, and I'm sorry I don't have the list, but I calculated one time that I came up with about $30,000 worth of stuff or credits that benefited the church. I want to just tell you one thing. So they were putting in the concrete of the new building, and all the plumbing is under the concrete, and so the concrete people put cardboard and duct tape. Well, during the application of the concrete, one of those cardboards moved. And when we went to calculate where the toilets were going to be, there was one less toilet drain. It got filled with concrete. And so what do? And fortunately, we were able to identify where it was, and we realized it wasn't completely filled to the top. It was just maybe this much down in the bottom. And so somebody had a good idea. And so for the next 2 weeks, I poured acid on the concrete, let it sit to dissolve about this much concrete, let it neutralize, then suck it out with a shop vac, and did that every day for over 2 weeks. And that saved us from a plumber and cutting up the concrete and a poor look because it wouldn't have matched the same concrete. And it was just one of the many things that I was able to add to the processes over the years because, like I said, I don't have a lot of money, but I have plenty of desire. Let me give you a few statistics here. Another thing that you may not believe is we've planted 50 trees on the property. I like trees. I probably get that from my dad. He planted trees everywhere he ministered, and we've planted 50. Now, I'm just going to tell you 15 of them are elderberries, and they're only about this tall that someone gave me free last year. But all the rest of them are big, and I thank people who let us plant those trees. More importantly, we've had 67 baptisms, 22 baby dedications, 27 weddings, and this is hard to believe, 108 funerals. You wonder how we have anybody left. But the Lord supplies, and as Anton said, probably those are the most important ministries because people let us in their lives. If you do a loose calculation, I've preached over 900 sermons in this building. That's 10,000 pages of manuscripts. That's 3.6 million words. So when I say thank you, that's what I mean, right? Thank you for putting up with those countless, endless amount of words. And that's not counting Sunday night sermons when we used to have them, Wednesday night Bible studies, Sunday school lessons, baby and wedding showers, and so many other things. So this day isn't about me. It's not about she and I. It's about all of us, but it's about recognizing that God holds it all. We've had every summer VBS. We had one summer we took off, I think, from COVID. We used to have live nativity. So we've had about 14 or 15 live nativities since we've been here. And let me just tell you about live nativity one time. Just like in September, it's hot. I don't know what it is about live nativity time, but it's usually cold. I would say 3/4 of them were like frigid cold, like standing on ice cold. And we live on a highway, so we always thought people would stop by. And a few people did, but most people just like zoomed by in the heat of their car. While we're standing out there going, Merry Christmas. Well, one time we expanded our parking to the north, and we thought that would be an easier place for people to pull in. And I remember that there was the time that we put it on the north side of the church, and we had live sheep. The sheep decided not to cooperate, and we had to wrestle the sheep down before we had lamb chops in the highway. And I don't know who, Joe, were you on that? I know Rex was. And I know Augustine was because we laughed about it the other day. Anybody else help wrestle sheep? Maybe it's just Augustine, Rex, and I don't know. But I remember wrestling sheep. I got to tell you about living on the highway is interesting. Those of you who get to live in the country, you need to move to Big Bryant and live on the highway. There's no sign out there that says stop, but everybody stops. They stop to change diapers, and sometimes they gift them to us. They stop to use the cell phone. They stop to take naps. They stop to rotate drivers. They stop for all sorts of reasons. We live on a highway, so that means we get transients. Transients means people are basically homeless and they go all over the country. We've lived here long enough now that we see some of them again. They just know we're nice. So, every 2 years we get to see them again. So one time we had this guy stop by. And he had been here before. I think he had been here before. And if you know anything about transients, they're a little bit mental, but they all love the Lord. They got like the Bible memorized, all right? They just want you to know how much they love Jesus. I'm like, I love you that you love Jesus, but I'm still leery of you, you know. And so they're okay with anything you give them usually because they're used to living off of the land. You know, they just go into a cornfield if there's no one nearby and sleep. And so we had this great shed, and one time the guy said, "Can I stay in your shed?" I'm like, "Sure, you can stay in my shed." So I rigged it up where his hammock could hang in the shed, and he stayed 2 nights, and that was fun. One time we had this lady stop by. Now, some of you know this. It was this time of year. We had just come off of, we were in the middle of the rummage sale stuff, and this lady stops by, and she says she's hiking across the United States. Well, she had just started in Fort Wayne, so she was way into her. And she had this blog, and she had this Facebook, and we don't even know what she was doing. We just felt kind of weird about it. And because I felt weird, I'm like, well, we got a shed, you know. And because it was rummage, we had a mattress in the rummage sale. So I pulled the mattress. You guys are thinking I'm crazy. You would have done the same thing. Because she was a little, whoo. And so we put her in the shed, and she stayed a couple nights. And then she headed down with this big story. She's going to go down to Muncie, and who knows where she's going. Well, we found out a few days later that she stole something from the next person who helped. So we were right in putting her in the shed. Just wanted to let you know that. We help a lot of people. This is not to brag, but this is just to let you know that a lot of ministry happens outside of Sunday morning. Many, many years ago, 6, 7, 8 years ago, I don't know, I lost track. There's a young couple comes walking across the parking lot. They needed help. They were living here in Bryant, so I helped them with whatever. I think I put him to work. He did some painting, mowing, something. Gave him a little money. And that turned into this years of helping this guy. He memorized the church number, and he would call me. Call me when he got out of jail. Call me when he got fired. Call me. And so one of the last times I interacted with him was maybe about a year ago. And this is the kind of people who need our help. And this is the blessing of being able to be paid to do your work or do the church's work. And so he'd call me. And I had to pick him up outside Coldwater Hospital on a bench because he was homeless. And the night before, he had walked until he got dehydrated, I think on purpose, so he could get an ambulance to pick him up and take him to the hospital where he could have at least food. I picked him up on the bench. He had no food, no money, no driver's license, no birth certificate, nothing. What do? You just do what you can. I drove him around for 2 hours trying to find somebody he knew, because he's from the area. Not one person would take him in, because he had burned so many bridges. But that's the kind of help that we offer. I did hear from him maybe 6 months ago. He wanted to thank us. Thank me, but because of you and the opportunities I get, he wanted to thank me for the type of help that I've helped him with over the years. I've been part of the Ministerial Association, president, vice president, Fairmount Camp director 2 years, PTO president when the kids were there, board of directors of the Pregnancy Care Center at times. I've been on the district board of directors a few years. I've been 20 years on the district board of ministerial development. That's where I get to help these young people come up into the ministry. I want to thank a couple more people. I want to thank Vicki for being a volunteer secretary. Many of you didn't know this, but for years, 1 day a week, all day, on her day off, she gave it back to the church. And I was blessed to be a part of that. Now we have Jennifer doing 8 hours a week, and now I get to boss her around. Both of them are out in the kitchen helping us today, and we appreciate that. Some of you have wondered, and you actually, a couple of you said it, like, this isn't your way of having like a good send-off. Like, you're not going to resign today, are you, or anything like that? Some of you have wondered that, and I'm going to say, no. All right? But let me let you into what happens sometimes, all right? I've been here 20 years. Did you notice in the bulletin that there's only 17 other people in our district that's 20 years or more? So out of 108 churches in our district, only 17 other people or 16 other people have been 20 years, which means people move. And why do they move? They move for a variety of different reasons. And so I want to tell you that, yes, over the years while we've been here, we've had 2, 3, 4, I think I counted up maybe 5 reasonably good offers. And here's the way it happens. Someone calls, someone lets me know, and I don't want to get outside the Lord's will, so I say, sure, let me pray about it. And, I don't really want to leave, but I'll pray about it. And, one of the things that prayer is sometimes the Bible says is wrestling with God. You've been there before. You're trying to make a decision. You kind of wrestle with God. Is he going to let you go? Is he going to tell you to do something? Well, so I would wrestle with God a little bit and then always come to the conclusion that he's saying, thanks for wrestling. It's been good. You can stay, you know. So I'm just going to tell you, about a year or so ago, I got another one of those calls. And I said, yep, I'll wrestle. I'll wrestle. Not that I want to, but I'll wrestle. I sat down in my chair in my office, and I closed my eyes to pray, and he said, I'm not even going to make you wrestle. Isn't that great? That day, he just said, you're off the hook. Don't even have to pray about it. Stay another year. So here we are. Just wanted to let you know that. I've said to myself, if I'm tired of preaching, and I'm going to go somewhere else to preach better, I can preach better here. And I hope that you've felt that. I've said to myself, if I'm tired, because relationships take energy and emotion, if I'm going to go to another church to do that, I can do better here. And I hope that you understand that we want to do better. If I'm going to a church just because I want a bigger church, that's just not a good enough reason. And if I'm going for the money, that's not a good enough either. Because here's what I know, that God is faithful, and he knows. And the only reason to leave, in my opinion, right now, is if God would move us. It reminds me of the Old Testament, where God hovered over the tabernacle. And the Israelites said that when you see the cloud move, that's when you move. Cloud by day and the glow in the dark cloud by night, fire in the cloud. And that's what happened. And if you go back and read it, I'm not going to read it, it's in Numbers chapter 9, you'll see that sometimes the cloud moved in just a day. It says that. They went out the whole process and they set up, and then the next day he moves. And they're like, but they did it. Why did they do it? Because they knew they wanted to be where the presence of the Lord was. And sometimes the presence of the Lord stayed longer, and they stayed in the presence of the Lord. So all I'm saying is, as long as the presence stays with us, that's where we want to be. And our prayer is that no matter what we do, that we are obeying his leadings. So I've talked a little bit about the past. I want to talk just in closing here a little bit about the future. And so I've asked if my dad, because I appreciate his leadership, if he would read the Bible verses that I want to focus on, and they'll be on the screen.
Am I on? Ooh. I just want to say that I received a new revelation today. That is that when I die, Paul's going to say, he's finally dead. And that may be today. I don't know.
I can guarantee it's no $24,000 check coming in the mail.
Hear the word of the Lord from Colossians chapter 1, verses 15 through 23. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created. That's a good place for an amen. Things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. Once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior. But now he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation, if you continue in your faith, established and firm, and do not move from the hope held out in the gospel. This is the gospel that you heard and that has been proclaimed to every creature under heaven, and of which I, Paul, have become a servant. This is the word of the Lord.
Man, just push the button. Before we get to that, and I promise not to be real long, I want to do a commercial here. Earlier on when we mentioned names, we mentioned Ken Hilliard as our treasurer early on. And Ken, of course, was old school, and he did everything by pencil. And I prayed that that guy had the best patience, because there were moments in some of his years and in some of my early years that bills had to be waited to be paid on until the offering came in. God is faithful in those times. And God is faithful now while we're sitting on a little surplus and we have a little breathing room, and we're looking forward to what God can do and will do with your faithfulness. And so I also want to mention by name our current treasurer, John McFarland. We appreciate these people like him and others who hours and hours outside of their own job donate many, many hours to the things that have to get done. So John's in the back. I appreciate his help. Why do we do what we do? Because of Christ, right? Because of Christ. I want to just reemphasize or emphasize that the verse that I want to look at here in closing is verse 17. In Him all things hold together. With that in mind, here are the things we're going to keep doing as long as the Lord blesses us, as long as people keep coming, as long as He doesn't move us on to someplace else. These are the things we're going to keep doing. That's based on these verses. In verse 22, you can read it while I speak. We're going to continue to preach holiness. We believe in the grace of God, don't we? We believe that God saves us by His grace from the penalty of sin. And if it weren't for Him, none of us would make it. We also, though, believe that God saves us and gives us power over our sin, which means a couple things. Number one, it means that we have a place to go, but it also means that we have something to do. He gives us power to live in this life like Him for a purpose. We're not just in a waiting room, right? We're in a service for Him, and we are going to continue to preach holiness. We're also, in verse 22, we're going to continue in our faith. If I could picture faith in different ways, one of the ways that I picture faith is like a rope that you hold on to in the fog, right? But you just don't hold on to any rope. You hold on to a rope that where you know it's tied to. You just can't see it. That's faith, right? Faith is what we can't see, but we know it's secure. And sometimes we have to walk in the faith. And I will tell you this, that the older I get, the more I study, the more I question, and the more I come to conclusions, I know that the rope that I'm holding on to is secure. It's not a flimsy faith, it's a secure faith. The Bible is where we get our faith, and it's God's Word, and He holds it together. It's not going to go anywhere. It's going to be solid. And also, we're going to continue in verse 23, in our hope. When I was younger, probably, just like any young person, and you hear about heaven, I'm just going to be honest, it's a concept. It's like maybe it might happen. It's like a fairy tale. And it's kind of like a good bet, right? When you're a kid in church, you're like, well, I'd rather believe in heaven and be wrong, right? I mean, at least it gives you some kind of optimism, and we'll just kind of pretend church for a while. But that isn't the hope that the Bible's talking about. The Bible says that our hope is not a unsure hope. Our hope is a secure hope. And the more that I study, and the more that I live, and the more that I see, and the more that I experience, I know that when we preach that there is going to be a new earth and a new heaven, it is true. And we're going to continue to present that as part of our ministry. And then in verse 23, as Paul summed it up, he said, He is a servant. We are going to continue to serve. That's where I see my position I know that I lead, and I know that I manage, but I hope that you see that I serve. And when we call on people to help, all we're saying is, would you join us in serving? There's been a few occasions, like Carl helping me this week, there's a few occasions where different ones of you have stepped right into our lives and served us. But most of the time when we call you, we're saying, can you help us serve somebody else? Can you help us serve the community? Can you help us serve the children? Can you help us serve? And we just go on because that's what we're going to do. We're going to continue to serve. There are two life verses that I've been using recently, and they're this. Romans chapter 12, verse 18. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. We don't make enemies. We don't like it when people are upset. We want to do everything we can to live at peace with everyone. We know that everybody's not going to come to this church, and that's okay. We just want them to love the Lord someplace. But we hope that everything that we do is making peace with people. And in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5, says this, keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have. And this is interesting because contentment is tied to the next portion of the verse. Never will I leave you, God said, and never will I forsake you. That's where contentment comes from, because you know that God will never leave you or forsake you. How can you not be content as a servant of the Lord when it's not about the money, it's about living for God? Seems like everywhere I turn, I find more and more ways to serve. And I said to my wife, I've got to figure out how to get paid for this stuff. But thank you for your support, at least in this portion of serving. So let me just close with this last little bit. I have been able to do a lot, and I'm thankful for it, a lot of things, and most of them don't come with financial attachment. So a couple years ago, the town asked me if I would help assist in getting a park in town. And so I went to one of my first meetings. I tried to stay out of the politics and stuff because, like I said, I'm trying to live at peace. Politicians don't do that very well. So I've kind of avoided the politicians, even locally. And so I went to the town, and I expected to be on a board to help, and I came away as the president of the newly formed park board. In 2 years, though, we've been able to put in playground equipment. The walking trail is underway. We got benches. We're hoping to move the old jail here in the next couple of weeks, remodel it. We're going to have a ceremony around Veterans Day, and so the Lord is blessed. And get this, it's unbelievable. I have been able, not me, but with help, we've been able to, we've been allowed to get, almost $800,000 worth of money to do what we're doing here in the town. Now, park that for a moment. A few years ago, our attendance was pushing about what we see here today. Our regular attendance we averaged in a year, not just one, in a year, our average was over 150. It's like 153 that year. Okay, that means we had some up and some down. So for 20 years, I've been walking across the parking lot multiple times a week, several times, sometimes in a day, and I always wondered, what would we do if we grew? And so some of the things we did was we built the fellowship hall, and then we had to address the fact that we didn't have enough parking, and we put parking out here and extended like 30 spaces. Well, what would we do if we grew in people? And then all of a sudden, we're growing in people. And we're like, this place only holds 180 for weddings. Now, people will put up for the bride and groom tight, but they won't put up for me tight, okay? So you have to have elbow room with a normal preaching schedule. So what are we going to do when we're pushing 150, 160? Well, like I said, we got the kids in the back and put an overflow room for some people, but we're still. And so one day, I was walking across the parking lot, and I hadn't been thinking about what we would do. I've been asking those questions all through the years, and I hadn't been thinking. And I walked right past this window over here, right up in the door, and right before I stepped in, the voice, and some of you heard part of this story before, the voice said, "It's possible." Just as clear as day, it's possible. Now, some of you know that when I was younger, of course you want to be, whatever, you want to be a fireman and a policeman, but I wanted to be Mike Brady from the Brady Bunch. And it had nothing to do with the 6 kids. I wanted to be an architect. And the Lord didn't really bless me with the opportunity to be an architect. I have reasons to I think why. He knew I didn't want to be stuck behind a desk, I guess. I don't know. But no architect. But I like seeing things, and I like drawing things, and I like building things. And as soon as I walked in the door, a floor plan just, boom, popped into my mind. And it wasn't profound. It was actually pretty simple, but I'd never seen it before. And I drew it, and I talked to a couple of the guys that were on the board, and even they said, yeah, this is pretty good. This can be done. You know, we should do this. And over the next several months, we took the next step and the baby step, and finally we actually paid for someone to draw plans, and we were going to knock these walls out and build, and then all of a sudden it just kind of fell apart. Attendance started going down for various reasons. Nobody was mad. We didn't have a church split. Nothing major happened. COVID came, and that didn't help any. And then now we're back to like 110 people. That was tough. Not because I wanted to build a church, but because I had heard this, right? I'd felt this. Like, what does that mean? Did I not hear it? You know, was it one of those days I got the bourbon out? You know, I'm just kidding. Just kidding, that was a joke. Too much coffee? You know, what was this? No, I was sure. I'm still sure. What does that mean? Oh, that's a test, right? That's a test. And that's what I came to. Reading the Bible one day, and I saw this account where God said to Abraham, sacrifice your son. You know why he did that? Because he heard the voice. Not because it made sense, but because he heard the voice. Are you with me? And then later we know the account that God provided a lamb, which makes it look like God changed his mind, but he didn't. It just means that God had a plan that he only let Abraham know a part of it at a time. And so that was okay. I think the Lord just said, you don't know everything. You thought it was going to be in this time. It's not. You know? Kind of like, why don't you wait for the lamb? You know? It's not your church. It's not your church. He holds it together. And so just recently, the Lord kind of put a PS on that, and he said, if I can supply on a committee that you didn't even want to be on, $750,000 for playground equipment and a walking trail, I can do stuff with your church. He basically said again, listen, it's possible. It's not your church. I hold it together. And so that's where we're going forward with whatever God wants to do. We'll let him do it. And I thank you for that opportunity from the bottom of our heart.